G'day everyone, I'm Justin Meadows and welcome to Evergreen Profits podcast. Today we're talking about domain scams, and to help us shed some light on this matter we've got Simon Johnson, who's a domaining expert, and Simon's co-founded one of Australia's first internet service providers and internet security companies, so he's been around the traps doing this thing for quite a while. He's got over 15 years experience with internet security, fraud and risk, and used to be a contributor to the APC magazine and also a best-selling author in the area of internet safety, having written Keep Your Kids Safe on the Internet, which was published worldwide. And Simon now runs the popular domaining site called domainerincome.com and is now pushing for reform within the .au domain administration to increase transparency and allow a more free market approach to the .au domain space. So welcome Simon, and thanks for coming along today.
No worries, thanks for having me.
And just to let the listeners know, that just a brief introduction on what this scam is actually about, and this has become a bit of a personal thing for me because my grandmother was actually suckered in by this scam, and that sort of led to me taking action. There's these companies out there that will send out letters to people that look like a legitimate invoice for their domain, even going so far as to have a Collins Street address in the header, which for those of you outside of Victoria, that's the corporate area of the Melbourne CBD. So it looks pretty impressive, but they're actually charging you for a domain which is different to your website. So instead of a .com.au, they might charge you for a .com or a .net.au, and usually their annual registration costs is hugely inflated. In my grandmother's case, that she was actually charged $250 for a .com, which is roughly 20 times the normal price. Also, this is something that a number of my clients have been approached with. Luckily, most of them came to me first and said, is this legitimate? But I just thought we'd shed some light on the matter and let people be aware of what's out there and what they should be doing. So I guess, yeah, firstly, what's your take on this scam, Simon? Because I know it's not necessarily the worst scam out there, because there's they are actually providing you with the domain. They do come up with the goods, but marketing in such a deceptive way at such an inflated price is pretty criminal, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is. I will say that I'm not a lawyer, but certainly yeah. I think it's at best, in my opinion, misleading and deceptive. But it isn't the worst scam out there. There are lots of other scams, but this seems to be the most popular, and it's been going on for at least more than 10 years that I know about. It was very, very popular in the late 90s when people were just still learning about the internet, and it was relatively new. And I remember back then it was an issue, and that just when OUTA was forming, the regulator, they decided to take some action, and that was to hide some Whois details in Australia, particularly email addresses and other things, to make it difficult for these scammers to actually get your business address. That was, in my opinion, very ineffective, as obviously you're going to put your business address on your website. Yeah. So, sure. What do you do? It's one of these things where, education is the key, and I think if we look into it a bit more deeper, it's also about people just being fallible. Small business has enough on their plate, and they get an invoice, it looks like it's for a domain, it's easy just to go and pay it and be done with it. And I think that's the sort of thing that these people are taking advantage of.
Absolutely. So what advice would you be giving to local businesses if they do get these emails or letters and suspect that it might be a scam?
Well, I think the first thing to do really is to know who you've registered your domain names with. And if you're like many small businesses, if you've either got one domain or you've got lots and lots of domains, you usually fall into one of two categories. So if you fall into the first category, if you've only got one or two domains, then it's pretty easy to know who your provider is. The key thing is knowing when these things come up for renewal, and not to just blindly click on any email that you get sent or to respond to any sort of thing, credit card form in the post. A lot of these scams, as you pointed out earlier, do give the appearance of having legitimate addresses. Some of them And we get these emails quite a lot because we have a large number of domain names. So we get lots of emails and lots of letters. Some of them I have noticed come with overseas postmarks, and that's often a giveaway as well. So these people are spending a lot of money trying to get in contact with you, and to them it's a numbers game. So really it's about just keeping an eye on it and knowing when your domains come up for renewal, and perhaps doing things like what we do, like paying multiple years in advance, so you don't have to go through the grief every year of renewing that domain name. So that's a good thing as well.
Yeah, cool. Also, if people do find it after reading or hearing about this, they are actually have been caught in one of these scams and they are paying too much, what steps can they take to get out of that scam and make sure that they keep their domain? What can they do, or what things should they be aware of if they're trying to do that?
Well, it really depends on the type of scam, and I think that, you know, if somebody is saying to you, well, in order to, say, re-register or renew your domain name, you've got to pay us $250, and they're not your registrar, then obviously just ignore it and rip it up. But if you've, say, fallen victim to it, and your domain name is now in the hands of some dodgy registrar somewhere who is demanding lots of money, then you can contact your registrar. You can obviously get some legal advice on it. You can contact, I think the Australian government runs Scam Watch. There's a whole host of things that you can do depending on the circumstances. The reality is it is tricky, and there's no kind of one size fits all approach because of some of the the misleading conduct and the dodgy practices that we see in some parts of the industry.
Yeah. Now, also just for businesses out there that do have a .com.au and are thinking about getting a .com, or perhaps the other way around, do you want to just explain to people what the difference is between the two and why they might want a .com or a .com.au?
Yeah, I think .com.au is quite well known within Australia, being an Australian domain name. .com is more of a global domain extension, if you like, for global businesses. I prefer .com. However, some search engines like Google can give preferences to .com.au domain names because they're local domain names representing Australian businesses. There are pros and cons of both. Sometimes you need a .com if you say would like to trade internationally. Some people, just the local small business, are quite happy having a .au. One thing I will say is that it can be tricky justifying a .com.au, as there are rules around registering in .com.au. There are no rules when it comes to .com. So sometimes the application process, during that process you may get knocked back. Sometimes it might be years down the track and you might get asked to justify how you are related and why you should even have the .au name. So it's a bit of a minefield. Yeah.
So it's worth doing a bit of due diligence when you're looking at getting a .com.au and find out what the rules are around that. Yeah, well, and for people that do have both, like I know that some people have for their business a .com and a .com.au, do you think it's worth building out two websites, or just redirecting one to the other? What do you think most people, especially local businesses, should be doing?
Well, they definitely should be building out websites. If you've got a domain and you don't have a website on it, that's a problem. So you really do need to build it out. It's it doesn't have to be very expensive. It just has to be done in a smart way. So, I know plenty of people who have .com and .com.au. Maybe they have a website that is their main kind of business brochureware website. Then maybe they have another which just generates leads and customers for their business. So if you've got a spare domain name, I'd strongly urge you to develop it out and make it work for you.
Yeah, sure. And what about .net.aus and .org.aus? Do businesses need to grab those as well? Or?
Well, it depends on the business. I mean, if you're building a brand and you want to protect your brand, I think $20, $40 a year for whatever your rate is to buy a .au domain name is it's a no-brainer. It's a worthwhile investment. .org.au has rules around that, very specific around who can register and what say, for example, charities and not-for-profits and things like that. .net.au is becoming increasingly popular, although it's still at this point in time quite difficult to get ranked within Google, but not impossible either.
And speaking of ranking in Google, I know that a lot of people have, when they are getting their domain name, try to go for keyword-rich domain names, and they might try and get Dog Training Melbourne, even though their company's name is Bob's Dog Training. What's your take on the brandable domain versus the keyword domain?
Look, I like both. I mean, I think there's a place for both. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And I think if you're building a brand and you're building value, then you're going to have an equal amount of success. If you've got a good domain name and you do a lot of marketing and do some really good SEO and get some good advice. Now, having said that, people do search on keywords, and keywords are popular and they get a lot of traffic. So, for me, I would have both. I would build a brand, but I would also try and get the keyword domains in my market, as you used the dog training example, and I would use that to generate leads for my business. You'd be crazy not to.
Another thing that's pretty new is the .tv, the .co's, and the .me's, and domains like that. What's the deal with those, just for those that are not aware?
Well, things like .tv and .co and .me have been popping up over time. They're called country code domains. So TV is for Tuvalu or Tuvalu, depending on your pronunciation. .co is for Colombia, and ME is Montenegro. But in terms of their use, I think people have been using them as vanity URLs. I myself, for example, have simonjohnson.co, largely because I couldn't get the .com. So it was just an alternative for me. It was a bit of a throwaway site, and I don't mind that. Would I base my entire business around .co? Maybe, depending on how much I wanted to do in the other areas of SEO and marketing a brand. So what we're seeing now, or we have seen over the past few years, is a lot of these country code domain names pop up out of nowhere. And what we're also going to be seeing in the future is ICANN, the body responsible for internet governance, and I'll use that term loosely, looking at expanding the number of top-level domain names to .anything. So you can be a body that handles a top-level domain name. So if you've got an idea, for example, I don't know, .app,
yep,
or .bank or .whatever, you can pay your $100,000+, which is non-refundable, to ICANN and create your own registry that way. So, who knows what the future is going to bring there. I'm sure there'll be some very big successes that will be promoted, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of failures there as well. But I think I really believe that is a bit of a trap, in that people can get far too focused on their domain extension and not put enough focus on building a brand and adding content. I think it's important to get the domain name right at the start, and that's fine. And you really want to make the best possible choice then. But moving on from that, there's a lot of other factors to concentrate on.
Absolutely. And just back to this scam, what sort of prices do you think people should be expecting to pay for a .com or a .com.au? That's
a pretty good question. I see a variety of pricing, and it's all over the spectrum. And I'll give you examples. For us, I know we pay below, believe it or not, the wholesale rate for a .com.au. But I know retail, the cheapest I've seen could be around, say, $25 upwards and it has been in some years, it's come down now upwards of $100. The key thing there is there's really no added value. There's a perception of added value. You're not going to get anything, your domain's not going to be better by paying $100 than it is by paying, say, $30. You might get a bit better support, perhaps, from that organisation, but that's about it. So in terms of .com, that can vary, and it usually depends on how many domains that you buy, but around the $10 mark is pretty much a wholesale, or I won't say wholesale, a retail rate, but it comes down from there. So these things go up and down all the time, largely because they're controlled by, take .com for example, it's currently controlled by VeriSign, and every now and again VeriSign decide that they'll increase their rates, which means that everyone else, all the other registrars, have to, or choose to, increase their pricing as well. So it gets passed on to consumers. So it does vary, and I will say one other thing is that sometimes, throughout the year you see various specials and coupon codes and things like that floating around where you can get a really cheap deal on a domain name, and those are special deals that happen with the registrar, or perhaps if they're not the special deals, the registrar has chosen to take a bath on their domains in the hope that you'll, say, take out hosting with them. So that's an entirely different model altogether.
Yeah, cool. Another question that I've found comes up a bit, because people often don't quite understand the process behind it, but what actually does happen if people forget to pay their domain by the renewal date?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's often a very popular one. It largely depends on the domain name. So I'll answer it in generic terms. So every domain has an expiry date. Think of it like a use-by date. So usually you'll get notified via email, or a letter will be sent out to you, and it will say that your domain expires, let's just say on January the 10th. And if you don't pay it on January the 10th, it will go into let's call it a grace period, where you've got 30 days or 15 days or whatever it is. And the reason I'm saying whatever it is com is different to com.com.au and other things. So there's different rules for different domains. But essentially there's a time period that elapses, and you can try and register it within then. If that fails, it goes into another phase called, say, pending delete, which means it's usually about a 5-day period whereby there's nothing you can do, the domain's going to get deleted, and too bad. After that period of time, the domain actually gets deleted, which means it becomes available for anybody to register. Now, where the tricky part of this equation is that there's a whole sequence of steps from when a domain gets deleted to when it becomes available. There are some backroom deals between registrars who give deleted domains or provide deleted domains to third-party companies to sell. There are other companies that step in literally the millisecond after your domain gets deleted and will register them again. So it's really a complex equation. Quite some years ago I did a little graph of the whole system for, I think it was ComNet and org. I might give you that if it helps your the listeners, and it explains how that process works. So you'll be able to look up where your domains are within that life cycle.
And is there any other things that you would like to share with the listeners that perhaps commonly asked questions that you encounter?
I think you've covered, in terms of the domain investment field and buying names, I think you've pretty much covered it. I think the one thing that jumps out at me, and I get asked quite frequently at conferences and places, is how do you value domains? So if you have a domain, let's say you've got dogtraining.com.au, a lot of people ask me, well, how much is my domain worth? If I was to sell it to a third party, how
that is a big one.
How much would I get paid? And the answer to that question is it really depends on the market, and it really depends where you sell it. So I do know that certainly a lot of businesses, in particular small businesses, have been sitting on domain names for a while, and you know, a lot of businesses have their ups and their downs, and some go out of business, and a lot of domain names expire. And there is quite a large market, a very large market in fact, that sells domain names and websites for that matter. So, you know, some of the things that I've done in the past is look at what other domains have sold for, and that's a term called comparables. It's a real estate term, where you look at, say, a two-bedroom house down the road with a you know, a little garden might sell for X $1,000 versus a large mansion near the beach might sell for Y $1,000. The same principle applies to domain names. So, you know, when you look at these things, you can usually get a feel for how much your domain's worth. Now, on top of that, obviously, if you've built a website and you've got some traffic and an email list and a social networking profile, all of those things can be factored in as well. But it's a complex process. We probably don't have time. we could spend all day talking about this stuff.
Yep,
but
sure.
It is an important one for small business.
So for those of you who want to find out a bit more information about domaining and about you, Simon, what's the best way to find that info?
Well, if you'd like some more information on domain names and how much they're worth, and you'd like to buy some domain names, you don't really know where to look, you can go to Domainer Income. That's DOMAINER income.com. And I also blog on and have a pretty extensive website at simonjohnson.co. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about me and what I do, that's where to go.
Great, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us about domains.
No worries, it's been great.
For those of you listening or reading this blog post, I encourage you to add your comments down at the bottom of the post and share your experience about scams you might have encountered or scams you might want to alert other people to as well. So thank you all for listening, and look out for the next podcast.